It wasn't the Hudson River. It came from what was the Morris Canal and right up Marin Boulevard. The damage was unbelievable. When you walk through the basement of Chalou and the water line is above your head, and you go further down and you go into what is the science building, but I decided not to go into the science building because there was still 2 feet of water there.
I remember when Jack and Mary Beth picked me up, going into the O'Keefe Commons with them, and I just couldn't believe it. You know, this brand new facility that we had really, kind of worked hard on. The tile was up, the lights were off. I really want to pinpoint that sense of I couldn't do anything.
And walking around with Rocco and Arvin, and I could not believe the way it was. For a while there, I thought, will we ever open up again?
The story of St. Peter's Prep begins in the waters of New York Harbor. It was here that the first missionaries from St. Peter's Church on Barclay Street rode to Jersey City to found a new parish with a familiar name. And over the decades, the same waves would later deliver not only Prep's 9 founding Jesuits, but so many of the immigrants whose American journeys and those of their sons and grandsons would pass through Grandin Warren. But on the night of October 29, 2012, the same waters that had given life and meaning to Prep's mission turned violent. Driven by the fury of Superstorm Sandy, the storm surge attacked Prep's campus, not from the Hudson River waterfront to the east, but rather from the Morris Canal to the south, dumping several feet of water into the basements of the West Campus buildings, buckling the turf at Keenan Field, and rendering the majority of Prep's campus unusable in the short term. That's where this Prep story begins. Those were some words that I wrote a long time ago in trying to tell the story of St. Peter's Prep during the Sandy experience in the spring 2013 Prep magazine. Some of those words actually appear on this plaque here as well, which commemorates the high water mark here in the basement of Chalou Hall, just outside what's now the campus ministry office. It's kind of funny to realize that probably hundreds of people walk past this spot every day without giving it much thought. But it really is an amazing story of how we had most of our campus unusable and bounced back from it. So when I say that the heavy blow that the storm dealt us is where this Prep story begins, that's the story I'm talking about. But in a sense, I lied a little bit because we're going to back up and put this in the context of the fall of 2012.
We're into the fall.
We're involved in the life of the school. Everything was, somewhat normal. It was a great fall.
But certainly, not much different than any fall I'd had before.
There was an excitement in the air. People were just starting to settle into a routine.
So, the school year was underway. I was teaching freshmen and I was teaching seniors.
I think the beginning of the year was relatively unremarkable.
And then at that time, Bill Ahern, who was our board chair, died unexpectedly.
In the space of a few days, we had lost our then retired vice principal, Pat Reedy, who was very much a part of Prep for many years, and then our then current chair of our board of trustees, Bill Ahern.
We were hosting the wake on campus, and still at that point, there was kind of the bubbling up of Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy or whatever it turned out to be.
And, like so many other storms, there's just a bit more of a hubbub about this storm making its way to us. People are talking about the different models.
But, like COVID, I never thought it was going to be that bad. I just didn't think we were that vulnerable. That's a true story. At the that Friday, the kids were joking about it, and I'm like, "What are you guys talking about?" And like, Mr. Galano, this hurricane's going to come kill us now. And I'm like, what?
I was expecting, to tell you the truth, that it was going to be another Hurricane Irene. You know, the eye of the storm would sort of pass us.
And little did we know that it was going to upend life as we normally live it.
I think we were actually planning on doing the same thing, like just kind of like we were going to sandbag the doors and sandbag the low points. And I think that we were taking the precautions that we thought were the worst case scenario. I don't think that we were anticipating that would be as bad as it was.
But also, I mean, our focus that weekend, Bill Ahern, and then Pat Reedy on Sunday. I mean, that pretty much was on my mind.
But I recall that the storm got such a serious threat that we had to get special permission to have Bill Ahern's funeral on a Sunday. And we had Bill's funeral in the gym.
And being on the Warren Street Plaza with Bill's family, his friends, members of the prep community, and really just after celebrating his life.
There were tables with some food for the hundreds of people who were there, and just seeing the tablecloths kind of being lifted up by the wind that was coming in.
And I remember looking up at the sky and just seeing like a line of gray clouds. And I've never seen anything so ominous.
That Sunday was Pat Reedy's funeral. Driving home from the funeral, I was the only car on the road. And there were signs saying, you know, shelter in place, state of emergency.
I can remember on that Sunday driving back with someone from the wake for Pat Reedy. And the storm, the wind was coming, and so something was happening, but we didn't know what was going to go on.
Since I live in a barrier island, the south shore of Long Island, I evacuated the previous year for Irene. And when we returned, it didn't seem too tremendous. So as the storm was heading closer to this area, we made a conscious decision not to evacuate.
I was thinking, you know, given all that we had been through with the loss of Bill, heading up and visiting my mother, I was saying, oh, this storm will be, you know, a big disappointment like they all are. Whether it was Bob many years ago or Irene, you know, for us. Well, it didn't turn out that way.
I approached Sandy almost a similar way, where I was like, oh, this won't be that bad. It'll be the same thing, and the city will be fine.
A year prior, we had been missed by Hurricane Irene, at least here at Prep, but this one wasn't going to miss us. That much was obvious, and it actually took another 24 hours for the worst of it to get here, but it already seemed pretty ominous on the late afternoon of the 28th.
I went up to Buffalo to visit my mother, and the storm hit while I was up there.
At the time, I was living in North Plainfield on Route 22. There was very distinct memory of the sound of crackling outside. And what it had turned into was the trees between the development and Route 22 were just snapping like twigs.
At the time, I lived just a few blocks away from Prep in a newer apartment building. And from my window, I could see the end of Green Street where it meets the Morris Canal. But I remember watching that canal rise and rise and rise and rise up the slope at the end of Green Street, and thinking, that's a lot of water. What's that going to do?
Oftentimes, I'll stay at St. Peter's Prep overnight, and I decided to stay that night at St. Peter's.
One thing that really stands out in my mind is I had a box of loose photos that I thought someday I'd put in a photo album, and I moved them up on top of a shelf that was maybe 1.5 to 2 feet high, thinking that'll be plenty of space. But little did I know, as the evening went on, the water started coming in from under the door, seeping up through the kitchen floor, coming up, pushing through the toilets, pouring through the outlets.
I looked out and I saw in the parking lot the car that I had parked there wasn't in the right place. I said, well, maybe I'll go out and just straighten it out and put it in a new place. And then I looked out again, and all of a sudden the parking lot was just so filled with water. Thank God I never went out, or I probably would have been caught in the car with the rain and never gotten out. And then because of the rising of the water in the parking lot, all the cars were going back and forth, and all the lights were going back and forth. It looked like a movie out of the science fiction.
And we had 3.5 to 4 feet of water in our house. And the next day, going downstairs after a scary evening, it was heartbreaking enough. But then when I saw that box of photographs, it was completely saturated with murkish water and unsalvageable. It kind of was heartbreaking because there's a lot of memories there.
We were lucky enough to have running water, but obviously no power, and no cell service at all. So I remember I was calling people that I knew from New York City payphones.
I mean, I didn't have power in Union City for about 6 days.
So, I was living in Secaucus at the time, and I didn't lose power. It was very fortunate. The rest of Secaucus was flooded and no power. And I remember seeing the news that, Jersey City was flooded, was completely flooded.
And then I went downstairs and I saw all of the water coming into the basement. I didn't know what to do. I think I may have called somebody.
I was up visiting my mother and spending time with her, and Jim D'Angelo was sending me pictures of our neighborhood via text message. And Jim lived right around the corner from us in the Gotham, and so he had a bird's eye view of Prep, and all I saw were our streets just filled with water that he was sending to me, and he was giving me updates. The water is in the parking lot, but not over by the English building and the gym.
I think it was Bob Reiser and Jim D'Angelo reached out to everyone and showed us the images and the pictures.
A substantial amount of water in the parking lot, so there was an even more substantial amount of water in the basement.
And so he was giving me sort of a play-by-play. But I knew at the time, or I suspected at the time, that this was going to be a big deal for us.
Just try to piece our lives back together again. And I think it was that day or the next day after, I received a call from Jim D'Angelo telling me that the entire music department on this first floor, basement here, which included a new lab we installed with iMacs and also an instrument closet which had students' instruments and many loaner instruments, was completely underwater, over 6 feet. So I felt like I was kicked in the ribs at that point. I felt like, wow, my home and my job.
And then I received an email, right, from Fire Riser. The basement was completely flooded and destroyed after being renovated.
So I think a teacher usually remembers where your classroom was. So my classroom was in one of the newly renovated, at the time, basement classrooms of Hogan Hall.
And remember, the O'Keefe Commons, the area downstairs, which was sort of some of our music space, the Moriarty Science Center, all of that was relatively brand new.
I remember Sister Frances and I, we were both here, and we went through the lockers, and we tried to open up all the lockers and take care of the stuff. Some of it was good, some of the books were good, many were not good.
I remember, I'll never forget cleaning it up and carrying things out into the parking lot. And I remember thinking to myself, will we ever open again? Because I walked through and it was unbelievable.
I remember Arvind and Rocco and Hugo all trudging through all that water, wearing their waders.
In Moriarty, we had all new mechanicals. Everything was new.
The new furnace and air conditioning and venting systems that we had in the science building that was all of 2 years old. He did Mulvey and Hogan. And so essentially they had no heat. One of the only places that had power still was Shalou. And then I get a call from one of the board members who had an electrician come in, and he said, shut off all the power to Shalou or it can burn down.
We had no power, and it was just it was filled with water. The smell of water, and it was pretty unusable.
First, we had to get all the water out.
And we are not able to have classes for a week.
I remember we hired Got Junk because the area where we keep all of our textbooks that aren't being used at the time was flooded 6 feet. And there were some things in classrooms in the basement that, I felt bad to a certain degree because I'm here throwing out stuff that some teacher's been using for 15 years. But I can't keep it. We got to get rid of it. The last of the school's VHS tapes were disposed of at that time.
I do have a very vivid memory of them taking us to our basement classrooms to get things before they totally gutted them again. So I want to say I remember it was very dark because there was no electricity, but there were like cage lights, people in hazmat suits, and they ushered me into my classroom where the water level had risen to just level with the desk.
So we assessed that, and then Jim D'Angelo started developing a schedule or a plan that would get us there.
Bringing together the faculty and staff and the administration in the library about a week later to say, not can we do this, but how do we do this? And the only way we could do it is to have everyone together.
He assembled the leaders, the department leaders and other leaders for a day in the library just to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this?
I was a very new department chair. I definitely remember being a part of the planning.
We had all gathered in the library in the English building, which was the only place that had power and heat, English building, the gym. And it was to, number one, assess what had happened, and number two, figure out what we were going to do.
Right? It wasn't can we, but how can we and how soon can we? There was this inevitability about it.
Okay, within these parameters, with these constrictions, this is how we can do it and to bring prep back.
Just having this spirit of, okay, whatever we can do.
It was just concern at that point. Concern, like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get the kids back in?
The main bulk of our buildings were, frankly, uninhabitable. But while we figured that out, while we decided what was going to happen, how we were going to get our other buildings back, we were going to have school.
It was like boots on the ground. Like we were just there. We had to be reflective and had to be thoughtful, but it had to be very quick because I think the number one goal was we wanted to open school again. We wanted to return to some normalcy. And we had to see kind of what that return to normalcy was going to look like.
And together, that team developed the approach of alternating days, bringing the kids in.
That in itself was remarkable. More remarkable still, the next day, Tuesday the 6th, the full faculty and staff is back, to discuss how this is happening. This is what we're doing, and we're doing it.
And didn't really know when we would come back. But, amazingly, a plan came into place.
It surprised me how quick the school actually put in place a plan.
And then pieces of that emerged. For example, transportation became a problem. All of the New Jersey transit lines were all flooded. How would we get the kids, there, so into the schools?
Prep was in such a unique position. Not the least bit, the flooding happening certainly put us in a position that not a ton of schools were involved in. But I think even if you take the flooding away, we were in a very unique position.
Everyone's different needs based on geography, depending on where you came from and how you needed to get yourself to prep. That presented a challenge.
Prep is a commuter school.
Lisa Syracuse outside with a clipboard, and parents who organized buses because the trains weren't running.
Wednesday the 7th, an assembly in the gym, all the students are back to learn what's going to happen and how we're going to get through this together.
After a week home, kids realized how important it was that they actually are here.
As I recall, we had something like 92% attendance for that, which, considering how difficult it was just to get around, and the fact that lots of families were affected at home, I think really said something about what being at prep meant, and what being together meant, and what continuing the life of our school meant to everybody involved. And it was really uplifting, I think, to see that just a few days later.
And I remember Anthony Lucretio telling the students, that something like, this is terrible, but we're St. Peter's Prep.
It's going to take more than a little rain to stop St. Peter's Prep. And, a great reaction from the students in the bleachers.
Our first step was to invite students back onto campus, but half and half at a time.
On Thursday, November 8th, we had classes.
And I almost have to give a lot up to God here to say, like, this isn't going to be perfect. This will be far from perfect.
But we had a modified schedule.
And at some point that meant 20-minute classes. Maybe kids came in the morning, not the afternoon.
In my position as a faculty member, I said to myself, I just have to provide some worthwhile instruction for the kids and get them kind of engaged in some type of learning process.
Having kids come together, having teachers connect with their students, and to really keep that energy going.
Yeah, real quick, get them in, get them out, turn it around, and get them back the next day. Try to keep them on task and moving things forward.
It was just to be in touch with the kids.
And so it was a little tricky to negotiate the new schedule and locations.
It's like, okay, we're going to make our base of operations in the English building in the gym. We're going to have every single person on campus in these two places.
The main building was not accessible. And everyone had to work out of the E building, which was unbelievable.
And it was really very tough because not only we could see the destruction, but also we had to share, like 5 or 6 teachers sharing the same room in the English building. It was the only building at that point functioning, with heat.
But one teacher's classroom that was open to be filled in was Sir Jack Campion. And so I remember bringing my freshmen into this classroom and Jack kind of checking in on their level of brilliance or not.
It seemed like everyone was almost like on a common wavelength and no one was complaining. Everyone was just like, hey, we got to do this and we got to do it right.
We had transformed the library into kind of a command center administratively, and even with some classroom space.
I just want to reiterate how many people were in the library at any given time and what was going on in the library at any given time.
Somehow we got through. People just, teamwork is an essential thing. I was really impressed with everyone pulled together, made decisions that could make things happen and accommodate the situation, in the best way possible.
But the administration did a great job of people coming and trying to make the school work afterwards. So much had to be done.
I remember walking into that room and thinking, how many people with all these desks can be here?
All the offices were in the library, so, I had space on a desk, the financial aid desk. I shared the space, I think, with the president, with finance, and I think with advancement. We're all just sharing this one table.
But it just was so smooth in such chaos.
And I'm saying it out loud, and I'm saying, what you would think of as chaos was almost this symphony of, you're going to be teaching religion over there. I'm going to be wrapping baskets over here. The president's going to be a phone call over there. Computer science is being taught over here. The principal is sending an announcement out over there. And I wouldn't say it was easy, but it just worked. I think we were all of the mind that this is what we have and this is what we have to do.
Everyone on the team was doing their job. Kevin Albers and the team were cleaning things up as much as they could. Jim D'Angelo was preparing for, how are we going to transition to a school week. Jack Caulfield was working on insurance. Jim Horan, Chris Casaza, and the team, we were beginning to talk about, how do we address this? That was sort of the next reality that hit me was, all right, we're going to be okay because everyone, who had worked on a regular basis at the school doing wonderful, tremendous, committed things were there.
We did it. We were doing it. Classes were happening, a week and a half after this storm.
The students responded well. People had various experiences. I know good friends of mine in Breezy Point. They were all devastated.
Roots down in Ocean County. So, where the storm came aground there, a lot of people lost everything they had.
The kids were kind of shocked too. They were having problems at their own houses.
I remember trying to be attentive to the students and those of them that were directly affected by the storm.
Some kids were concerned because they might have lost, their family might have lost like a vacation home or a boat. And other kids were like, everything, my entire apartment in Jersey City is underwater.
Reassessing what we were asking students to do when they left the school building. We can get a lot of good stuff done in that 40 or 50 minutes in the classroom that maybe that stuff at home when they're, trying to clean up the house that got flooded or they're trying to clean up the yard that got destroyed. Maybe I don't need to put a ton of stuff on their plate right now.
Like a lot of alums, I think the English building holds a special place in my heart. It's so unlike any building that you would encounter at any other school. And that just makes it so uniquely, so iconically prep.
I don't know how we ended up getting it. I don't know if we found it in the library or if when we were getting our supplies from our offices, it ended up in one of our boxes. But we had with us a copy of Prep Men and Manners.
These really were strange times, and I find, when in doubt, consult the handbook, right? I happen to have a copy of the Prep Handbook in this temporary office space that we were sharing. And in describing the buildings of Prep Campus, it actually says right here about the English building, or what was then in 1966 called the Freshman Building. Built on rock, it should stand the wear of centuries. Freshmen, too.
Maybe even that's even Paulus Hook, but there's that one solid piece of rock on which the English building and the gym sit. Everything else was swamp that they filled in. And so that over there was secure.
And of course, what a great tie-in to St. Peter. Upon this rock, I will build my church.
I don't even know if I have the right word. It was kind of poignant that here we are in the one building that has power that wasn't flooded, built on solid rock. Upon this rock, I will build my church. And so even St. Peter's Prep had the English building, which was built on solid rock.
But here we stood on this rock in this one building, trying to rebuild the life and culture of St. Peter's Prep. That sort of became the rallying cry, asking people to help us out, but also for us internally. I think, we thought of ourselves as standing here upon this rock.
We were faced with a situation where school had to get back in session. We had to fix the building. That's going to cost money that we don't have. Insurance was going to cover something. We knew that, but we didn't know how much. We had to ask people for money.
And boy, the donors responded very generously.
Somebody had said that they were going to give us a challenge grant of $25,000. So, we sent out the emails, we sent out the social media that said, donate to Upon This Rock Fund. There's a challenge grant of $25,000. That if we get $25,000, we're going to get $25,000. We sent the email out, and within 5 minutes, I got a phone call saying, I want to give you the full 25. So within 5 hours, the prep community raised $50,000. And there were, just dozens, hundreds of gifts that came in, that we put towards the repairs.
reaching out to anyone that I knew to say, hey, we're going to need help to rebuild. And I think a lot of people answered that call, which just goes to show that, this is a pretty special place.
Parents, families, and alumni who had their houses damaged as equally as Prep had been damaged. We had some people who were living on the shore, alumni who were living on the shore, who lost everything. So we had to be very cognizant of the fact that we were going to be asking people to help us who needed help themselves. That was going on, but at the same time, people were calling and emailing and saying, like, I want to help.
We had a lot of help. We brought in anybody we could get, people who work for us, people who work with us, people who have been here sometimes. They all came in.
The phone calls, the people who connected us to FEMA and the insurance underwriters and guided us through the insurance process, and the alumni and parents who assisted with the construction process. The moms who coordinated the suburban bus lines because the trains weren't working. The fact that everybody who worked at Prep kind of put in everything.
But, of course, this is Prep. So it's amazing. The money came in. The people all supported us.
We are not stopped. We work around it. We work together, all of us, on campus and beyond, with tremendous help from the broader community, both financially and in some cases, doing the actual work.
Afterwards, we realized we were fortunate.
Because of St. Peter's Prep Connections, the Prep family, we were able to connect with a lot of different people.
We had people coming in and doing things for us rather than doing things for someone else because we were Prep. So we were very fortunate.
Because just getting contractors who were capable of doing the kind of repair that our buildings needed was quite difficult, and only by the goodwill of some parents and alumni were we really even able to get the buildings back as quickly as we did.
Getting all of our mechanicals up to snuff and all of that was really done by the Prep family. Because we wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise. Like I said to you, when I was up in Buffalo, I was thinking, we'll just have the guys go down and clean it out. But it was this connection we had. It was as if it were a gift from heaven.
And I just remember being very grateful for that, that they were able to get things up and running and redone so quickly.
It truly is astonishing what we were able to do. I mean, and we couldn't have done it alone by any stretch. But we got almost all of our buildings back before Thanksgiving break. Shalou Hall was the last building we got some use of back, and that happened after Thanksgiving. But before Thanksgiving break, so less than a month, we had back the Moriarty Science Center, Mulry and Hogan, and O'Keefe Commons. In fact, we were able to host Jug Night in the Commons the night before Thanksgiving, so that tradition was able to continue.
We were able to reevaluate on a day-to-day basis. It's like, okay, if we have another building open, how can we adjust the schedule again to get more instructional time in?
We had thought, okay, what can we do differently here? What can we do better here? We did that whole kind of music room in the front of Shalou. We did the Campus Ministry Center. We also learned, I put cinder block walls in the basement and not drywall.
And then you could see where the water was in the Commons. We had to replace the bottom of every single wall in the Commons. In Hogan, we had to replace 5 feet of wall on every classroom, every hallway. And so we thought, if this happens again, we don't want to have to do this again. So they are all now cinder block walls up to the 4 feet.
You can dwell on what was, and you can dwell on the destruction of what had been, or you can think about what can be. And then we began to imagine what could be.
The flooding that happened in the basement did change our thinking on how we were going to construct in the basement. even something as simple as like we raise the tile line up higher so that if it ever flooded again, we at least could, not have to take out drywall. They renovated the basement of Shalou and moved campus ministry down there, so they have a full kind of campus space for themselves. So there was a lot of things that came out of that.
And I think that some of the outcomes for student space, for classroom space, only happened because we were forced to think about what it could be.
Again, the conditions were very difficult. Can't iterate that enough. But I remember just having fun and laughing and finding the joy in even the most difficult of circumstances.
Maybe it was because we were coming up on Thanksgiving. I found my mind wandering to the best, or I don't know, the only mainstream Thanksgiving movie ever made, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Right after their car has caught fire in that iconic scene on the edge of the highway, Steve Martin and John Candy are at a point now where it's just hilarious to them, everything that they've been through. And as they're sort of recounting the fire and laughing it off, there's one line Steve Martin says, "Why do I feel like I'm at summer camp?" And that line just kept coming back to me. Why do I feel like I'm at summer camp? There was just something about being in the English building. Everybody, packed into this tight space, doing the best we could to make some reasonable facsimile of St. Peter's Prep happen under really trying circumstances that brought everybody together.
I think a great school at its core needs to be about the relationships that are forged, and the inspiration that can be imparted, and the learning for all of us that we can derive from each other, especially through the most trying of times.
The show must go on. That our students do need school to the best of the way that we can serve it, even through major, minor crises.
You learn a lot about the importance of relationships, of interconnectivity, of the soft side of a school, and the value that really that provides. And again, a place like St. Peter's has that so much that carried us through.
From a professional standpoint, I definitely realized the idea of kind of collaboration and collegiality, how important that is.
What I learned is to trust other people a lot more and not, feeling that, I needed to have all the answers or even to do all the work to get the answers.
What I can say about prep is that we are always very flexible and ready to face any challenge.
The only thing a crisis does is it points out to you who you are. And the thing I learned about leadership and at a place like St. Peter's was a good leader is someone who works with good people.
That was a great lesson to me that I brought to much of the rest of my work, and it was great comfort, and it's still a touchstone for me to look back on and say that the greater the collaboration, I think the greater success that we can expect.
We are not called to simply experience ease. We're called to rise to the challenge of each day, and from time to time, the overarching challenge of something almost untamable.
Obviously, one of the defining moments for prep students of my generation would be 9/11. Not just the horrors that transpired outside our windows, but also how prep came back from it. Just about a decade after that, I'm, back here as an adult, and here we are challenged again by something completely beyond our control, something totally beyond our walls. And here I am again, inspired, amazed, proud of what we're able to do to get back on track after something of such magnitude happens, and in this case happens much more directly to our campus.
I know the school was damaged, but I can't, in my mind, picture the damage. All I can picture is everybody coming together and working to make sure that, even in this diminished capacity, school was still going on.
People just accepted the situation and said, let's plow through this and let's pull up our socks and get to work and make things better and get back on our feet.
It was almost seamless how we adapted to the new scenario, which I credit to the people at Prep.
Everybody did what they had to do, and it was amazing.
Anything that you would think in retrospect or even planning purposes, you couldn't do that. We all did it. I think that our alumni and our parents rose to the challenge. I think that our staff and our students rose to the challenge and found inside themselves. I found inside myself what I'm capable of.
Can an experience be humbling and also fill you with pride? Because if it can, that was the experience. I still, 10 years later, look back with great pride at how Prep came through the Sandy experience. But it was, I think, also something that called us to be humble. It called us to recognize that no single one of us could fix this. This was something we had to do together, and it was something that we had to be reliant also on help from outside.
We emerged more aware of our strength than we were before.
I don't know what the magic of Prep. I couldn't define the magic of St. Peter's Prep. You just know it's there. You're making me emotional.
That's just a sense of resiliency and teamwork that, is unmatched, I imagine.
So I really got very impressed by the calm demeanor, that Father Rice had at the time, who was very calm, very supportive, and also Mr. D'Angelo. So that's something that struck me, very strongly. And say, oh, well, I think that I'm at the right place, right? I feel safe here.
It's a blessing to everybody who's there.
And really an affirmation of who we are as Prep, as a community. We care about each other, we listen to each other's stories, we respond, and we adapt to make sure folks are being taken care of.
Just the generosity of the Prep community. Working in development, that I could go to parents and I could say that, we still want to have a fashion show. And they're going to be like, yes, we'll do it. That we can send an email out with a challenge and someone would call within 5 minutes and say, I'm going to meet the whole damn thing. The fact that we were willing to work gladly under very difficult conditions. I don't think you find that everywhere.
The true north, so to speak, for all of us is the students, and it was then, and it is still today. And I think that just kind of highlighted it because like I said, no one really complained. We met, we figured it out, and we said it's not going to be perfect, but we have to do it for them.
Kids coming into school, and but people rallied around, and I think kind of a good spirit was there. It's a tough time, but we're going to get through it, and we're going to make it work.
We are always ready to be flexible and to be open to growth. So that was a moment when we actually had to be open to growth.
St. Peter's Prep emerged from Superstorm Sandy because of who St. Peter's Prep is on a daily basis. We didn't make up anything new. We didn't become something that we weren't. We were simply ourselves in our integrity. That's why we emerged from Superstorm Sandy. I'm convinced of that. You just don't wake up one morning and become something you're not. When tragedy hits, you are who you are, and that's what happened at Prep.